Right, so it's nearly Christmas. We all know it's nearly Christmas. It's partly nearly Christmas because me and Anna saw the Coke truck in Liverpool recently. We didn't go to see the Coke truck. That would be weird because we're not 7. And so we went into Liverpool to do some shopping. The car started smoking. It was a lovely trip. And so we went, and there was a massive crowd. We turned the corner, there was this big Coke truck there. We're like, oh, all the kids were getting the photos taken. Loads of scallies were trying to steal 3 cans of Coke. Liverpool. Lovely stuff. It was a nice time. And so, yeah, Christmas obviously means a lot of different things to a lot of us. Me and Anna, my wife, we do kind of an 8-day Christmas tour. We go from here, we do 4 days in Grimsby in the northeast, and then we do 4 days in Bournemouth. Very different Christmases, it's fair to say. Bournemouth, very nice, very polite, very friendly. Grimsby, he's friendly. The politeness maybe is slightly lacking. There's a definite difference when it comes to presents time. Like when you go to Bournemouth, everybody sits around nice and calmly. You open one present at a time. Everyone stares at you while you open that present, and you're thinking, this better be good, because I've got to have a fake face on right now going, yeah, that's great, socks. And so, but in Grimsby, no such pressure. We get down in the morning, it's like someone like blows a whistle and shouts go or something, and we all just rip presents open, done, no one cares, done. You get them done, you open them up, you go in your own little world. So if you get something rubbish, you can just put it down, no one cares. And so a very different kind of thing. And so one of the things that happens in my family in Christmas, the Della family, is we're kind of competitive gamers. Anna, who married into this, not so much. She's happy to sit off quite quietly and look at us a little bit shocked, but we will kind of chain board game. Very competitive kind of family, and it's all nice and polite. But if you haven't won a game for that first day, it's noted. You know, my family are very friendly, but my dad and my mum will drop in, you won a game yet? Shut up. Happy Christmas. There's a reason we don't go home that often. And so Anna's happily to sit outside of it. Now, I did have a lovely clip, and I was going to lead into, obviously, we're here to talk about one man, and then I had a lovely kind of comedy clip of Cliff Richard singing. But I'm a technical idiot, and you don't do a PowerPoint on a Saturday night because you haven't got time to redeem it. And so we've lost my clip of Cliff Richard, which is devastating to me. It took me an hour to clip that, put it in PowerPoint. It should not have taken me an hour, I know. But it took me an hour, and that's gone. But we are here for one man, and we have got a video clip, and it's a real video clip, and it is working. We're obviously here to talk about Jesus. So we've got a clip about this. Now, we'll have a hologram on saying, like, this is a preview, as if we haven't downloaded it and paid for it properly. We have, but again, I downloaded it, and it didn't work properly, so we're using some kind of copy from the internet, but I promise you, in case anyone comes after us with copyright, we have paid for this. I can prove it. Okay, so, Mark, can we play the clip?
Born to set thy people free from our fears and sins. Release us, let us find our rest in thee. Our rest in thee.
Okay, so that's what we're really here for. We're not here for Cliff Richard, thank goodness. We're going to read from John chapter 1. It's not on the screen, the verses, but we're going to just start with John 1, verses 1 through to verse 5, and then we'll pick up later on in a bit. So it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Okay, so obviously at Christmas time we're now thinking about really the time when Jesus came into the world, and we're obviously going to spend just a few minutes here just thinking about kind of three things that really kind of stood out to me as I kind of thought about the kind of Christmas story, and I thought about Advent, and I thought about this whole time, just three things that really came to my mind. So the first thing we're going to look at is Christmas often is a time. No, the other thing is this is taken. They're all a time to something, which is from the Cliff Richard mistletoe and wine clip, which I aimed to get wedged in everyone's head, which is ruined again. So they're all where he goes, a time for giving. Well, I'm not singing it, and he did that would have been chaos. They're all a time to something. So it's a time to start again. A lot of people think of kind of Christmas as New Year, obviously as one year goes and another year comes, and you think, well, whether it's been a good or a bad year, you kind of think, well, next year it doesn't have to be that way. Next year can be better, and kind of as you finish work, as you kind of go into a new year, you think, right, well, it can start again, and we can kind of make a fresh start. Now, that's and now some of you in this room may have played Championship Manager when you were young. I imagine JP's Women's Bay knows it. Now I realise it's now Football Manager for the younger ones amongst you. But in my days, it was Championship Manager. It's the most addictive game in the history of the world. I would be there with my cousin Gaz. He'd come round to my house in an evening. We'd just say one more game, and then you'd finish the season. But then when you finish the season, it's exciting because you can make transfers. Before you know it, he's still there at 7 a.m. the next morning. We've both got like college. And we're like, what are we doing? People have used their Championship Manager CVs where you manage a football club on a computer game. They've used their CVs to apply for real jobs in real football management world. I've heard of people who in a big cup final will dress up in a suit for their computer game cup final. I've heard people who play the Champions League music, the champions, that one. They play that before they play the Champions League on their computer. It's too far. It becomes an obsession, and people take it too far. But the thing with Championship Manager when I was a teenager, when you've got a big game, I've spent all this time getting to this big cup final. I don't want to lose that cup final. And so something in you wants to cheat. You want to save the game before then. And then if it goes badly, you can just go, oh, well, restart. But in your heart you've not won that cup. So at that point, that's what me and some of the other people used to do. Let's just save it before this game. We don't want to waste. Otherwise, we have to spend another 10 hours getting to this point to maybe win it next year. And we'll know that we'll do those 10 hours in a row. We're not going to bed until we've won the cup next year. And I used to think, there's a story that we're going to talk about. One of the stories that was on that kind of video was the story of Noah. There was obviously right at the start. Now, the story of Noah might seem like an odd topic to bring up in an Advent talk, but we'll see. Now, the story of Noah is obviously a story I've never heard, and been in churches for like 30 years or whatever. Never really heard it in a kind of grown-up setting. It's always in a kid's setting. But if I may, I would say the story of Noah, it's not a kid's story. And so I realise that our kids will have done Noah at some point, because, it's got nice, look at the happy lions. It's even got a smiling lion. Of course it has, because all lions smile. But if we look at Noah's Ark, it's quite a tough story. Noah's Ark is a time where God just thinks the world's out of control. And he just kind of picks the best of us and goes, I'm going to start again. And I imagine that in the kids' kind of work that we do in church, we don't say, and then everybody died. We just kind of go, look at the giraffe, isn't it nice? But it's not a kid, it's a really tough story. And I used to think that kind of it had just gone wrong, and God quite went, oh, well, that didn't work, I'll just restart again. And I just kind of think, if you kind of just take a moment to think, God's created this world, and he's put these people on there, and they walk away, and the pain that it must have caused them to go, this is broken, I'm going to have to try and start this again. And to kind of say, do you know what, I'm just going to wipe this out, I'm going to take a family, and I'm going to start again. And we kind of go, oh, well, God saved them, and isn't the rainbow nice? And I just kind of imagine that, as we kind of think about God saying, I'll never do that again, I always just think that God just probably thought, I just can't do that again. The pain it must have cost him, the anguish of seeing people, his cherished kind of creation, seeing them just kind of go, thinking, I can't do that again. And as we kind of look for the story in Noah, we kind of think at this point, as Jesus comes into the earth at Christmas, it's a proper new start, because the problem with a new start, like a Noah start, is you can take the best of us as human beings and think, I'm going to start with the best human being. But the problem is it's never going to last, because as human beings, we're kind of broken, we mess up. You know, God could have done this over and over again with the best human being. And before long, people would slip up, people would mess up. From here, within a few generations, we kind of get Abraham, which is good, but then you get Sodom and Gomorrah and the kind of evil cities, because people kind of turn away and people kind of tend towards kind of chaos and away from God. And even then, even though God knew that the people were a mess, he decided that even at this point that we were worth saving. And the story of the Old Testament is people kind of being raised up. Good people for a time will lead their people close to God, but then somebody else comes and the people fall away. And then somebody comes and they might be good and it might last for a time and the people fall away. And over again, the best of us, the best people come in, but it can't last and it doesn't last. Because when you start with the best of people, people will fail and will let down. And we come to the point where Jesus comes in. So as Jesus comes in at Christmas, Jesus comes in as the light. It says the light shines in the darkness, the one that was always there. He's not just one of us. He's not just the best of us in terms of a human being. He's not just the best man that you could find. He's man, but he's God. He's this kind of perfect creation that comes in. And before Jesus came in, I read something the other day which was saying that people kind of guessed at the character of God. They knew about God. They heard about his commands. They'd heard the stories. But they didn't really kind of see the fullness of God. And as Jesus came in, we see what God's like. We see the heart of God. And we see Jesus saying, this is what God's like, but also this is how you can be. This is how I'd have you live. This is how I'd like you to be in your life. And there's a word that I kind of saw when Jesus talks about you must be born again. There's a kind of Greek word, and I do not do Greek stuff often, but there's a word called anathen, which is a great word because it means like come from above, come from the original creator, not just start again, start over. It's starting again from above, and the only way that we can have this fresh start is if it started from above, not just us going, do you know what, I've messed up, maybe I'll just give it another go. And of course we can give things another go and we can learn from mistakes and get better. But ultimately, if we want to really kind of make that difference and really kind of have that new, fresh life, it can't just be us starting again. It's a story I've told a number of times, but it illustrates the point well. Is when I was at uni and we were 21 and there was 5 accountants living in a house. Imagine the fun times. And so 5 of us living there, and we went in. The carpet was horrible, and we decided to do up our lounge. And to cut a long story short, because a lot of you have heard it, what we did was we sent the kind of sensible one and the big Geordie to carry stuff, because obviously that's what Geordies do. And so we sent them there, and somewhere in the mix they got confused and they let the Geordie make decisions. And the Geordie decided to come back and he said, we're going to lay our own carpet. And we're like, no, we're not laying our own carpet. That's madness. And he decided, no, we are. And so we didn't know how to do it. And so in the end, we cut it into shape. We're like 4 of us starfished in corners on the carpet. It looked appalling. We just got loads of glue and we bunged it on top of the original carpet. Looked abysmal. You went in, there was just like carpet this thick, double carpets. And the problem is we kind of try and heap on restart after restart after restart without really turning to that anathen, that kind of, do you know what, God, I need you to do this. I need you to clean me out. I need you to take out all the failings, to take out all the sins that I've made in the past and give me that fresh start, that restart where I really clear out my heart, not just build on top and on top and on top of all the mistakes that I've made. So Jesus comes to say it's not about kind of just starting again and doing your best. It's about kind of really a new way. It's about this open relationship where it's not a time of priests coming and offering sacrifices. And as Jesus comes, we see it's a time of humility. And we'll see, I'm going to read just a few more verses in that passage in John from verse 9 onwards. So John 1, verse 9 to 13, it says, the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children not born of natural descent, nor of human decision, or of a husband's will, but born of God. And so as we see the kind of story, obviously, kind of the verse we're reading there doesn't kind of talk about the nativity story as we know it in terms of the stable, etc. But in Matthew 2, the kind of wise men, the kings who come to find Jesus, when they come to find Jesus, they go to Jerusalem. Of course they do, because that's where a king would be born, in a royal city, in the kind of big place, you know, and they kind of get told, no, it's not Jerusalem. He's going to become in Bethlehem. And in the Luke version, you get the kind of the shepherds, you get the stable, you get the manger. And straight at the kind of start, we've got this Jesus who doesn't fit in our world, doesn't fit in our boxes, doesn't fit in where we'd expect him to be born. He's born into this kind of squalor, into this poverty. And the way we'd set this world up, it's almost like Jesus from start to finish is going to say, well, I am the king. I'm not a king as you would make me the king. I'm not the king in the way that you build structures. I'm the king in the way that you do not understand, that you cannot possibly grasp. And he's not too grand to kind of come into this world. And in the same time, he's not too grand to come in and just deal with ordinary people as you say throughout his life, as we see all the time. And he doesn't just kind of, as Jesus comes, it's not just, right guys, here's another commandment, like in the Old Testament where we've got some commandments going to Moses, and then we've got new teachings coming through the prophets where they speak to the kings. God doesn't just send another message. Jesus says, look, I am God. I am come to show you myself. And that a restart will come from looking at my life and through what I'm about to do, through I'm really trying to follow me, as Lucas said before. And so he comes into this time where people are distant from God, that some people know about God and they're kind of using it to kind of get power, to get status. The temple's a bit of a mess where people are kind of following all the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of laws, but actually the kind of knowledge of kind of that relationship with God is as far away as it's been. And as Jesus comes in, he kind of breaks all those structures down. He doesn't come for the highest place. He doesn't come to kind of speak at the kind of biggest place. He speaks on hills and on mountains and by lakes. And he goes into the temple. And he doesn't go in there to kind of just take the accepted place. He goes in there to show what a mess the temple is, as he kind of turns it around and says, look, you've made a mess of what it's meant to be. You've made a mess of how God is. And even in that time, Jesus is showing us that as in the days of Moses, days of Noah, that people somehow are still worth saving. That even though it's a mess again, that he comes and he says that people are still worth saving. And that same God that came then dwells in us now. And to say that even these days when we kind of read the news, and it's obviously all bad news because good news doesn't make the news, as we know. And so at that point we know we can look at our world and go, but our darkness is extra dark. And there was a guy who spoke recently, we were at this kind of Jesus culture, and he said, don't kind of just talk about how dark your darkness is, or we can quote statistics about how bad things are in your area and how tough it is where you are. You know, and he says, oh, you don't know about our darkness. Our darkness is real dark. It's dark, dark. And he said, like, Jesus comes in to be light. And the darkness, you know, has got nothing against the light. And so the same kind of God that came in the days of Noah, the same God that came in the days of Jesus, he's here in our town of Warrington. As we talk about kind of revival, one of the greatest things that Anna said to me probably a year and a half ago, she was like, I really think there's going to be revival in Warrington. And then as I kind of went, okay, and I was listening to her, she said, seriously though, I actually believe it. Not like, because we hear a lot of talk about revival, and it's an easy thing to kind of go, oh yeah, God's going to change things. It's like, but no, he really is. And like that kind of confidence and that assuredness that kind of comes from God. Because as Rod was here last week, and he just kind of laid down that challenge that if we could kind of just introduce one person to Jesus, and he talked about the numbers and and again you can kind of hear that and think, oh yeah, it sounds so simple, and we kind of hear that and think, yeah, but is it going to happen? But it's possible, because Jesus isn't just humble. He's not just this kind of humble person who came down and lived in a stable. It's going to work because Jesus ultimately is the king. And he's not just this kind of baby in a manger. And we like the humble element, and it kind of comforts us, and we feel good about Jesus being humble and that he accepts us. But he's not just a humble guy. He's the king. And we can't reduce him to one of us. It's not just that 2,000 years ago a baby was born and he was a nice guy and he did some good stuff and he died. You know, there's plenty of good people, obviously, that do a lot of good in the world, but Jesus is more than that. Okay, he's not just one of us. He's a king. He shows us just this kingdom of heaven that he is known from the start. He's got the power to create the world, and he lives his life in the shadow of the cross, knowing what is to come, knowing that even from the gifts that he gets given, where he gets given this kind of myrrh, kind of hinting at his death to come, he knows what is awaiting for him. He knows what is ahead. And he lives his life knowing where it's going to end up. And he lives his life living with that love for people, knowing that these people will reject him, knowing that a lot of people were walking away, knowing that even though that these people will hang him on a cross, that somehow he knows that these people are worth saving. And that ultimately the best thing about the story is obviously it doesn't finish on the cross, because we have a king that the grave could not hold. You know, we have an empty grave where the grave could not hold him. We have a living king, and that is where kind of he lives today. He lives in our hearts, because in the Old Testament, the kind of Holy Spirit would come on people for a time where it'd be like Samson or whatever, where the Spirit of God would rest upon them for a time, for a specific purpose. And as Jesus come, he said, I'm going to send you the Holy Spirit so that he is alive and living in us, active, because the grave could not hold him, and because we get to kind of live our lives in communion, in relationship with him. But as living our lives kind of recognizing that Jesus is the king, we can't just do it kind of in a meeting. We can't just do it at Christmas. We've got to recognize in our lives day in, day out that he is the king. And being the king of our lives means we have to give him control, and trust that when he leads us, he's going to lead us into a place that is the right place for us. And ultimately, that's a little bit scary for a lot of us. And I was reading a book recently as a kind of comedy author, kind of guy, does a lot of stupid challenges, which kind of really appeals to me. And one of the things that he kind of read the encyclopedia in a year, and he was on the quest to be the brainiest man in the world, and he lived kind of biblically for a year. And he's not a Christian guy, but it wasn't like blasphemous or anything. But he's just following some of the kind of slightly older rules that we don't follow, like in Leviticus, like about mixed fibers and all this kind of. So he was kind of really looking at some of the literal points and trying to live that out and see what it would be. He's a bit of a wacky guy, and because he does all this, his wife is long suffering, and so he decided to do a year of kind of experiments. One of them is that he outsourced his whole life to India. He got some Indian person in a call centre to deal with everything. She would send his emails, she would send his wife flowers, she would organise dates with his wife for him, she would do everything. It was so it's quite a funny book, but one of the things he does is he gives control of his life to his wife for 1 month. And so he just says, you are the boss. And so obviously she loves this. So he's doing everything. He's giving foot massages. He's cooking. He's doing all the housework. Well, not all the housework, more of the housework. She doesn't trust him to do much. And so she gets to the point where she says, look, can you change the channel for me? Or no, can you turn the volume up? Sorry. And he's going, but you've got the remote right next to you. He's like, yeah, but I want you to get up and do it at the TV. And he's like, come on, really? And she's like, this is the best month of my life. Let me have it. And so the danger is that we think control, if we give control to God, it's going to be like that. It's going to be like just God asking and asking and asking. Do we really have to do this, God? And it's going to be a nightmare. And he will ask us tough things. He will ask us to do sacrificial things, things that go out of our comfort zone. But he won't do it to be spiteful. He won't do it to go, well, you owe me this. He'll do it because he wants his kingdom to come in this earth. And he wants obedient people who will dare to believe in him. And the danger is if we keep trying to restart without accepting that Jesus is the king, we can end up in a place like this. Now, I realise you might think, well, we end up on a road. That's exciting. Now, this is a roundabout in Grimsby. Now, again, exciting times. It gets better. And so on the right there where that lorry is, my friend Mark, when he just passed his test. Now, those of you who've just passed your test would know the fear that comes from a stall. And then, especially when you've got men in the car and they're kind of having a bit of a snigger, you think, I don't need to stall again. Those of you who drive automatic cars, Hannah, won't know that fear. But those of us who've driven real cars would know the fear of just trying to find that biting point. What if I stall? And he stalled coming out of this on the right, and we all kind of sniggering a little bit, and he tries to recover it. He's a panicker, and that's the problem. So he stalls it again. And he gets a bit further in, and he stalls it in 8 times. 8 times later, he's in the middle of this road, just horizontal. There's people beeping. There's people going around on pavements. Everyone's looking at him. He's on the 6th, 7th stall, and he turns it over, and he stalls it again. And obviously, everyone in the car is wetting themselves. And that is not helping him. And so he's just there, just panicking, going, just shut up! Just shut up! And he's proper spinning out. And at one point, he's like, well, what if I get stuck here forever? I don't think you'll be stuck here forever, Mark. We'll be all right. And so eventually, on like the 8th time, he gets there and he drives off. Absolutely amazing. Like, obviously, that was when he was 17, 18. He's now 33. Of course, we don't let him forget that. And so we use it in preachers. Of course we do. We're good friends. And so, but the problem is, if we don't accept that Jesus is the king, we can be in this place where we stall and we think, oh, I've started, but a month later it's not worked, and we'll give it another go, and it's not worked. And there'll be times as we follow Jesus that it will feel like it's not working. There will be times when he calls us to do something and we struggle and we fail. But ultimately, we've got to just keep turning it over, trusting that he is the king, that he's not just a guy who's just calling us to stuff that we might fail. And when I was 19, in fact, after my first year of uni, I was asked to kind of just stay on and lead, be part of the team that lead the kind of hall group Christian Union, and which was fine, but at the time, I was kind of thinking, I was going to live with my mates. I had sort of 10 to 12 kind of good mates in 2 houses. Some were the accountants, some were the Geordies. It was a mixed group. And so at that point, I was thinking, I was going to live with them. But I prayed about it, and I thought, okay, this is probably right that I do this. And the problem is that position didn't come with an automatic room in halls next year. And so I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I think God wants me to do this. I have to run for this thing called this Junior Common Room Committee, which is very dull, but it's like a group of second years who take responsibility for kind of running things within the hall, looking after the students, and that kind of stuff. And you can apply for different positions, so there's like a sports secretary, there's an overall president, all this kind of stuff. So I would have thought I was going to go for the sports one, but that clashed with Christian Union, which obviously was the point of me staying. So that was kind of written out. And so I went for welfare rep, which was just like, making sure people are all right. And so you can imagine it was the time of Ali G. You can imagine how many people went with Kazai's welfare. It was too many jokes about it all the time. And so every other position had one person going for it, apart from mine. I actually had 4. I was like, oh, come on, God. Come on, I could have gone for one of these positions. I had 1. You could have made it easier for me. So we had to go through these votes. We had to kind of go through posters. We had to drum up support. The problem is, the Geordie guys that I'd hung around with, great fellas, and they're really open to kind of me talking about Jesus, and they'd really come along to church with me and listen to things. But, once they'd had a couple of beers, they weren't, afraid of a fight. And so I was kind of trying to run for this position, and I had these really good friends who were costing me votes. And so I was like, especially this 20-stone guy called Beef. He's a threatening fella. He's a lovely fella. He's like a big cuddly bear. But the amount of times he'd come into my room at night, we kind of had rooms opposite each other, and he'd just plonk himself in my bed, fall asleep. And I could not, honestly, he's the most impossible man to wake up in the world. I genuinely, and this is bad, while he was asleep, I just thought, I'm fed up with this. I need to wake him up. And I just punched him in the face. Didn't even stir, which means I'm very weak. And so I just thought, so the amount of times I just had to pick up his keys and go sleep in his room. And he'd wake up next morning and go, why are you in my room? Oh, yeah, it's my choice, Beef. My choice. Just thought I'd go and sleep in your room. And so the problem was that was costing me votes. And so it got down to this vote, and ultimately they'd all picked their houses at this point. And I thought, if I don't get this, God, I'm pretty homeless next year. I'm here to live in the hall for next year. If I lose this vote, I do not live in that hall. And I can't lead the CU if I'm not in that hall. And the votes came in, final day of term, before we kind of went away for the Easter break. Final day of term, they kind of called out all the votes, set my category. And the kind of president of the current year kind of came to see me and said, look, Dale, it's too close to call. He said, I'm just going to tell you, you're behind by 2 votes at the moment. So as it stands, you've lost at the moment, but we need to recount it, and we've got to get the kind of someone official from the uni in to recount it, because obviously it depends on who gets to live where, and it's quite an important deal. So that's it. I went home. I had to go back to Grimsby for Easter, and I was sat there going, oh, this is brilliant. I'm probably homeless. Cheers. And so, but at that point, I was kind of there, and my mate Beef, my main contender was a guy called Emre, some little Belgian guy who I'd never heard speak, which was embarrassing that he beat me, because I was like, I've never even heard you speak. I am unpopular. And so my mate Beef tried to solve it and went, would it help if I go beat him up? No, it wouldn't, Beef. No, I promise you, that is probably one of the issues. I'm blaming you. But at that time, it was really weird, because when he announced it, I was like, oh, no. And then, you're kind of trying to get worried about something, but you kind of can't. And I just had this weird kind of peace, and I said, Beef, honestly, I think it'll be all right. And he was like, but Dale, you're homeless now. I'm like, cheers, Beef. But I think I'm all right, Beef. And it wasn't like me being a mighty man of faith. I tried to worry about it, but every time I did, I just thought, I just got the feeling of, this is right. It's all right. I'm going to lead this kind of Christian Union. And I went home to Grimsby, got a phone call the next day, and he said, we've counted them wrong, and you've won by 1 vote, so you can be there next year. And I was like, okay, God, that makes sense now. But it was one of the kind of times where I kind of just knew that, do you know what? God's the king. And it wasn't just like you better come through here, God. It was actually, do you know what? I've trusted you this far. And there was part of me that thought, you better come through. But there was something in my heart that just kind of knew, do you know what? He's called you this for a reason. He's not called you this to go, oops, sorry, that was a mistake. Because ultimately, he's the king. And we've got to trust him with our lives. We've got to trust him with these things. And sometimes we've got to put ourselves out there where actually the cost to us, if it's not of God, is potentially quite big. Okay, but ultimately, that's kind of where faith comes in, and that's where we kind of trust him. And just to kind of finish us off, we've got one kind of set of verses on to read at the end from 2 Corinthians. So just going to read 2 Corinthians for, chapter 5, verses 16 onwards. And it says, in fact, from 17 onwards. Therefore, if anyone's in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation, that God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. And ultimately, as we kind of think about the kind of this kind of message at Christmas time, we come knowing that deep down we're not good enough for God, knowing, that we're not worthy. But somehow on the cross and in our lives, God says over and over again that we are a people worth saving, that he is not going to come and just wipe out this world, that he has sent Jesus for a new way, not just to start again with those of us in this room who we maybe think are worth it, and the rest of us are just kind of binned off. God says these people are worth it, and these people are worth it because through Jesus we have this righteousness and this ability to come boldly before God, to come boldly to that throne, knowing that we can be adopted into his family as we kind of lay down our lives, as we say, do you know what, Jesus, I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to live my life following after you. And so as we kind of finish this this kind of talk this year, the three things to kind of just to dwell on really as kind of a Christmassy New Year kind of thing. It is a time to start again, you know, and it is a good time, New Year, to kind of think, right, what am I involved in that, you know, it might not be bad, but it's just taking up my time, or what do I not need in my life? It's time to not be afraid to just kind of lay stuff down, and a time to kind of just say, do you know what, God, there's kind of habits in my life or things in my life that I don't want, that are not of you. A time to really just kind of just say, do you know what, God, I used to be passionate, I used to have this, and just lay it down and just saying, God, I'm just going to lay it down, and just I'll pray that you would make something out of the kind of pieces and the fragments of my life. And the second thing is that comes with humility, that we lay down our lives, making sure that just as Jesus 2,000 years ago didn't really fit in the world that existed, making sure that we haven't created a world around our life that Jesus doesn't really fit and that we try and wedge him in. But actually it's a life that's kind of wide open with him at the center, and that everything else kind of falls out of that. And then the final thing is accepting that he is the king, accepting his kingship, trusting that what we follow is real, trusting that what we follow is not just good ideas, it's not just nice thinking, but it's actually a king. It's a king who's in control. It's a king who has power. It's a king who has authority. Okay, and so ultimately, that is the kind of message that I want to leave us with, that ultimately he's the king, and that, you know, we are worth saving. He's declared that with us, and he's a king that could not be kept in the grave. He's a king that was not dead, and as he came to earth, he did that so that we might be his ambassadors, that we might be in relationship with him, that we might know him. So I'm just going to pray to finish us, and then we're done. Yeah, God, we just thank you that all those years ago, you just declared a statement of how much you loved your people, Lord. And we thank you that you just did not commit a nice act, but Lord, that you came down and you beat that grave, Lord, that you beat death, and that we come to you knowing that you have the power of eternal life, Lord, knowing that in you is hope, in you is life, and in you, Lord, we can see this town changed. In you, we can see people transformed, Lord. We know that you are the one who changes lives, the one who comes into hearts and makes all things new. And so, God, at this Christmas time, I just pray that you'd help us to lay down our kind of selfish ambitions, or the things that we hold dear and the things that we hold back from you, Lord. Help us to just let them go and to know what it is that you would call us to, and to dare to believe, Lord, that you are the king, that you are who you say you are. I just ask that in your name. Amen.